Letter 8 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Admiral Urich. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by L.W.J.S. Letter 8. It may surprise you to hear me speak of books in hell, but you will soon perceive the fitness of things, it being neither more nor less than this. Whatever is bad must come to hell, so of printed matter whatever is morally evil or arrogantly stupid tends hitherwards, the books arriving first, the authors following, and their publishers along with them. You will understand then that we are well off for literature, of a certain description, that is to say. Polite literature, for instance, has provided us with countless novels, very popular, if trashy and sometimes immodest. There is no civilized nation or country that has not produced its share, varying in quantity or quality. They seem represented by two species chiefly. One can hardly call them schools, the purely sensational and the sensationally impure, the former being content to hint where the latter touch boldly, the former often supremely worthless, where the latter are wickedly ingenious. Many authors, and especially some authoresses, appear to find their life's duties in pandering to depraved taste, or worse, in fostering it. I might mention names, but I refrain. Only let me assure these experts of the pen, ladies and gentlemen, that they are well known here. No doubt it will create quite a flutter in their bosoms, adding not a little to their sense of fame, to learn that their talent is so extensively appreciated, and that their books are fashionable, not only in polite society on earth, but even in hell. There is this drawback, to be sure, to damp their spirits, that for the present they must be satisfied with mere honor, pay being withheld till they themselves join their circle of readers here. Then their reward shall be given them in this manner also. This branch of the so-called belles lettres, trashy novels, is greatly in vogue upon earth. It is not the good books which chiefly enrich the publishers, or authors either. There are people whose intellectual food consists in nothing but the former, but the soul lives not that could testify to mental or spiritual growth by their aid. If the use of such books is null on earth, what must it be here, where not even the miserable object remains of whiling away the time? But to proceed, there is no lack here even of theological writings, especially of modern commentaries, but also of the dogmatic and the homiletical kind. To speak plainly, how many a book of fine sermons or of religious comfort arrives here, preceding the hireling shepherds? With casuity, too, we are thoroughly provided. The Middle Ages are represented chiefly by a vast amount of priestly falsehood, systematized into all sorts of fanatical quibbles and sacerdotal inventions concerning the deep questions of religion. The more modern school may be said to have reached a climax in the days of Voltaire and the encyclopedists, taking a fresh start with Kant and his followers. You observe I speak broadly, in a European sense, refraining from particularizing or quoting nearer home. You may judge for yourself, and be sure that no literary means are wanting here to advance the interests of atheism. For, mind you, even in hell those who believe and tremble may be brought to a worse state. For the rest, since I never troubled myself about theology, either as a science or otherwise, I am not likely to study it here. Besides this so-called true theology, there are found with us the writings of those puffed-up, half-crazed fanatics, the false prophets of every degree, who make a sort of trade of religion. Their literary effusions are generally laughed at, even here, but in most cases the author himself arrives before long, and laughter for him turns into weeping. These curious divines have a special corner assigned to them in this place, differing greatly from the paradise they believe themselves heirs of in virtue of their singular calling. Philosophy, too, is well represented. Philosophers, on the whole, are a harmless tribe. Some of them may be groping for wisdom, which includes goodness and piety, and others are merely the victims of some peculiar mania which hurts no one. We get the writings of those only whom conceit of intellect drives to the front. I might quote some curious instances showing how, within a professor's den some 10 feet square, the universe may be grasped, the mystery of life solved, eternity gauged. In fact, how the ocean of the infinite may be got into the nutshell of a finite brain. In passing merely, I mention the literature of the law. If I ignored it altogether, it might be taken for disrespect, and I am sure I would rather not offend the gentleman of the robe. Let me state the plain fact. I reverence justice, but I feel doubtful about lawyers. Did not some sharp-witted urchin make the discovery that the devil was a lawyer from the beginning? I would rather wash my hands of them, not understanding them in the least. Last but not least, I turn to the literary geniuses of the reviewing department, at the risk even of most dreadfully offending them. No reviewer, I presume, would flatter himself with the conceit that his dissertations could have any but the most ephemeral value. I feel loath to disabuse their laudable modesty, but I am bound to let them know that some do live in hell. I have made the startling discovery that of reviews not a few appear to be written in ignorance, or inspired by envy and even downright malice. Reviewers form a species apart, not nurtured in babyhood, it would seem, with the milk of human kindness. I was assured once that in order to review a book properly, one had need to be something of a misanthrope, something of a cynic at any rate, since barking and biting seemed to be the great delight. Be this as it may, I have always maintained that reviewers, as a natural curiosity, may be divided into two classes: those who are capable of passing judgment, and those who are not. The former, strange to say, cautiously, and indeed rarely, advance their criticism, and nothing of theirs is ever seen here. The latter may be subdivided into professionals and amateurs. The first of these, who trade, as it were, in the reviewing line, will have to plead guilty in most cases that they started originally with an aspiration of book writing, but did not succeed. They have never gotten over their disappointment. The second subdivision consists chiefly, would you believe it, of a set of precocious youths, as clever as they are conceited, requiring an outlet for their exuberance. I have known them of the age of 20, and even less, feeling grown up all of a sudden by means of their first review. If their criticism was somewhat green, there was audacity to cover it. They don't mean any special harm, but they do feel themselves seated on a throne, duly hidden, of course, and snubbing authors, their grandfathers in age and experience. By dint of numerous reviews, then, we are kept au courant with the events of the book market. Whenever a specially mordant piece of criticism arrives here, we know that it has been called forth by a publication which is probably good and certainly harmless. It is the caricature only which reaches us, but it is so, alas, with most things. As for newspapers, it stands to reason that much of the daily food provided in these quarters cannot fare any better, since ambition of gain, private or public, unblushingly presides at the board. How many a journal has but one object in view, the making of money? How many others have actually sold themselves to further the paltry interests of this or that party, not caring in the least, in their hardened consciences, how far astray they lead the public mind? And what shall I say of the appalling amount of dispatches, notes, and official memoranda interchanged between the various cabinets for no other reason, it would seem, but that of misleading? Specimens of ambiguous phraseology, ever appealing to truth and justice, but heeding neither truth nor justice wherever a chance of gain, or even the interest of vulgar passion, come to the front. This sort of political documents are rarely got hold of by newspapers even. On earth they are of the things that walk in secret, but they fail not to furnish us down here with many a curious explanation of historic events. I have come to suspect that nothing is more outrageously false and cruel and opposed to every will of God than what goes by the name of higher politics. You see from this sketch that we are not at a loss for reading, but you will also perceive that the vile productions reaching us can nowise tend to edify or even really instruct us. If they enable us to follow the events in the world, it is by a kind of inverted effect, suggesting in fact the very opposite of what they assert. There is here no pleasure in reading. On the contrary, the more one peruses, the more one sickens. But, nauseated though we feel, we are unable to get out of the intellectual slough, the mire of a lying literature. I never imagined, while living on earth, that I had need to render thanks for anything, that health, riches, happy days were gifts to be grateful for, but rather accept them as the natural appurtenances of my existence. And if I thought of them at all, it was only to wish for more, for I was never satisfied with life as I found it, nor with the world I lived in. Now I view things differently. I see now that the gifts of life are blessings unspeakable, and all the greater for being entirely undeserved. On looking back, and I am ever looking back now, there being nothing before me save one thing, awful and horrible, the judgment to come. On looking back, I say, I am bound to confess that the blessings of a single day of life on earth are innumerable as the stars. How rich is life! There may be misery and trouble on earth, and I believed I had my full share of both. But it has all dwindled to nothing since I have come to know the wretchedness of hell. Let me assure you, out of my own dire experience, that the most suffering creature on earth has much to be thankful for. Man's life, whatever it be, should bring him to his knees daily. And if you have nothing left of earth's blessings but air and light and a piece of bread to satisfy your hunger, you have need to give thanks. I see it now, but for me it is too late. In hell there is nothing, absolutely nothing, to be thankful for. You, however, whose sun has not yet set, may still learn to yield your hearts in gratitude. Ah, hear me, I beseech you. There is no help for me, but help may come to you. I have told you, my friend, how continuously I am the prey of memories, how much so, to what extent, I mean, you little guess. That deeds of iniquity and particular sins should assail me, tormenting the soul as with fire, is natural. But this is not all. There are other things, counted for little in the world, which cling to the conscience with a terrible vividness. Every little falsehood and unjust dealing, every word of deceit and breach of fealty, every evil example and want of kindness, they are all present now, piercing the heart as with daggers of regret. I thought so little of these things in life that I scarcely stopped to consider them. They seemed buried on the spot, every year adding its own share to the mouldering heap. They have risen now, and stand about me. I see them, and I tremble. I was just thinking of an example, out of hundreds which press around me. I take one at random. I have felt haunted, lately, by the sorrowful eyes of a poor little street boy. Whenever I turn, I see him, or rather, not so much him as his tearful, troubled gaze, rising in judgment against me. It has all come back to my mind how one evening I sauntered about in the park, a poor little beggar running alongside, pressing me to buy a halfpenny worth of matches. I did not want them, and told him so, but he persisted in crying, "Only a halfpenny, sir, only a halfpenny." He annoyed me, and, taking him by the arm, I rudely pushed him away. I did not mean to hurt him, although, to tell the truth, there was not a particle of kindness in me at the time, nor lay the wrong in not buying his matches. I was quite at liberty to refuse, had I denied him kindly. But he annoyed me, and I was angry. The child, flung aside roughly, fell in the road. I heard a cry. Perhaps he had hurt himself. Perhaps it was only grief for his matches lying about in the mud. I turned and met a look from his eyes, full of trouble and silent accusation. It would have been so easy for me to make good on my thoughtlessness. So little would have comforted the child. But I walked away, heedless of his grief. Now, few people would call that downright wickedness. Few people in the world, I mean. But here, unfortunately, we are forced to judge differently. Years and years have passed since, for I was a young man at the time. But the memory of that child has returned upon me, his look of sorrowful reproof adding to the pangs of hell. It is but an example, as I said, and there are many, many. But not mere deeds. Every word of evil carelessly spoken in the days of earthly life comes back to me with similar force. As poisoned arrows, such words once quitted my lips, as poisoned arrows they come back to me, piercing the heart. Oh, consider it, while living voice is yours, and speak not lightly. There is no saying what harvest of sin may spring from a single word. And, if pity for others will not restrain you, be advised by pity for your own selves, since requital will come to you yourselves only in the end. And not merely deeds and words, but every harmful thought recurs to me, to gnaw away at my heart. There is a saying with certain philosophers in the world that nothing is ever lost. If this be true in the material world, how much more so it is in spiritual things. Ah, terrible truth! And further, apart from the evil done, it is the good left undone, the opportunities wasted, which stand around me with pitiless scourge, and their name is legion. Thus everything, you see, both what I have done and left undone, comes to life here in this place of woe, takes shape, I ought to say, rising in accusation against me. I try to escape, but they are about me everywhere, those shapes of terror, enough to people a world with despair. They persecute me, they torture me, and I am their helpless prey. Memories of the good left undone. Alas, they are far more bitter than those of the evil done. For temptation to do wrong often was great, and in my own strength I failed to conquer. But to do good for the most part would have cost little, if any, effort. I see it now with the new insight into life which hell gives. The man lives not who is excused from leaving good undone. However poor and humbly situated he may be, opportunity is ever at his door. It is for him only to open his heart and take in the opportunity, for his own heart is a well of power and of blessing to boot. He who is the fountain of love and purity, from whom every good and perfect gift cometh, has wondrously arranged it, that in this respect there is but little difference between the rich and the poor, the gentle and the simple. Let me conjure you then, brothers and sisters, listen to the voice of your heart while yet it is day. Listen, I say, and obey, lest the bitterness of repentance overtake you with the night, when no man can work. Ah, let no opportunity for the doing of good escape you, for it will rise against you when nothing is left but to wail in anguish. I do not address these words to those who have grown pitiless as flint. None but God could touch them. But there are well-disposed hearts, which a ray of light may help to expand. I was not hard-hearted while I lived in the world. On the contrary, I could, for the most part, easily be moved to charity, if someone took the trouble to remind me. What ruined me was that boundless love of self which prevented my seeing the wants of others. Or, if I did see them, I did not stop to consider them. I receive now the reward of my deeds. Would that this fearful experience of mine could work a change in you. That might somewhat assuage my deepest sufferings. But even in that much of mercy I cannot believe. The soul in torment can only doubt eternally. I cannot but give you another example. I remember a poor family living in a miserable cottage not far from the lordly dwelling I inhabited. As often as I passed that way, I looked through the lowly window, for a bald head moving to and fro in measured intervals attracted my notice. It was long, however, before I saw the face. The father of a numerous family would sit there in ill health, gaining a humble livelihood. It appeared to be not necessity alone, but delight in his work also, which kept him up. He was a wood-carver of no mean capacity, and worked for a wholesale house of children's playthings in the city. Strange to say, he was particularly clever in producing all sorts of ravenous beasts. He, who looked a personification of meekest mildness. Lions, wolves, and tigers graced his window-sill, he bearing trouble as a patient lamb. I said he was sickly, and the family was large. The wife took in washing, and they helped one another, each trying to ease the other's load. But misfortune overtook them. The wholesale business failed. The poor man lost his livelihood. The bald head no longer appeared by the window. The cottage looked a grave. What had become of him? I once asked myself the question and stopped there, for you know self scarcely left me time to trouble myself with other people's affairs. Still, opportunity thrust itself in my way. I saw him again, not merely his bald head, but himself. The poor man, bowed down with ill health and unused to hard labor, stood working in a brick-field with trembling knees. I could not but pity him. I knew he was working himself to death, trying to gain food for his little ones. Indeed, he was in as imminent danger of life as if all the lions, wolves, and tigers whose images he had carved had gathered round to destroy him. I witnessed a touching scene one day. Passing about noon, I saw the wife there, who had come with her husband's dinner, a dinner I would not have looked at. I saw how tenderly she wiped the weary forehead, how the children, for they had all come, clung to the father, the youngest climbing his knees, and how grateful he was for their affection, which roused him to new endeavors to gain a miserable pittance. The sight really moved me, and I walked away, thinking I ought to do something for the struggling family. It was easy for me to find some post for the man which, while requiring no hard work at his hands, would keep them all in comfort. I certainly would see to it, but was called away on business. Other things occupied my mind, and I forgot all about it. I did remember it after a while, but then it was too late. The man had succumbed. The family was ruined. But there are worse furies than these persecuting souls in torment. I cannot tell whether it is by imagination only, assisting what, for want of a better word, I must call the jugglery of hell, or whether this place of damnation has its own actual second sight, but it is a fact that sometimes I can see the entire growth of evil, spreading over years perhaps, and involving soul after soul, originating in some careless word of mine which proved to be the seed. I turn away, but I am driven to look again and again at the terrible consequences, and words cannot express what I feel. It is appalling to think of the endless chain of sin and misery to which a single act, aye, a word even, may give rise. A chain, I say, for it is a frightful truth that the evil effect does not always spring from the seed as a single stupendous birth, to live and die for itself, but there is a demon power inherent in it of begetting and conceiving, wrong bringing forth wrong in endless succession. It is by its consequences, its capability of engulfing others, that the worst potency of sin becomes apparent. It is of direct evil example, too, I would speak. How fearful is its power, how far-reaching its influence. Whatever wickedness a man may commit in the world, what is it as compared to the wrong he may be guilty of by his example? Then sin is as a mountain torrent, bursting its banks and carrying the unwary headlong to destruction. You may be dead yourself, yet your sin may live, yielding a terrible harvest. It was in this respect that the demon ruling my life did its worst. I went my sinful course, flinging evil seed about me, and stopped not to consider how many I might bring to ruin. Do you understand? Perhaps not fully. Let me return to memories. I happened once to spend an evening with some dozen youths gathered for social intercourse. I was much older, and it was quite by accident that I found myself among them. But, enjoying the reputation of a boon companion, they entreated me to remain. It flattered me, and I stayed. They evidently looked to me for information, which made me all the more willing to show off my superior experience. Being a witty talker, I added not a little to the evening's enjoyment. We made little speeches, sang, and drank to each other. Now, I knew that these young people would take as gospel truth almost anything I might tell them, believing any worldly wisdom I might point to as the road to success. The concluding word was given to me. I rose, ready to give them the benefit of my knowledge. Dare to be happy was the motto I chose. I reminded them of the position I enjoyed in the world, averring that my life was brimful of satisfaction, that I had always had whatever man could wish for, and that I had had it because I had dared. It was true in all things that faint heart never won fair lady. There was a treasure of wisdom in these words beyond the treasures of Solomon. They were just entering upon life. I could give them no better advice to go by, no better aim to follow, than was expressed in these words. Dare it! Dare to be happy! They thanked me with cheers of enthusiasm. They were flushed with wine, but another spirit than that of wine lay hidden in my words. Its subtle influence was even then upon them, intoxicating their souls. With some of them its fumes, no doubt, passed away with the fumes of the liquor, but with others, 3 or 4 of them, the false maxim had caught. They went about into opening life armed with a rule which consisted of falsehood mostly, and a particle of truth. It took them to the broad way, and not only them, but others through them. That lying principle, which sounded so grand and true, spread in widening circles, ruining soul after soul. It is still spreading, alas, and I see no end to the pernicious influence. There is another recollection burning as molten lead upon my soul. I had been visiting friends in the country, and was on the point of leaving to return to town. The carriage was at the door, and I downstairs already, when I remembered having forgotten something in my room. I bounced up the stairs and came upon a little housemaid tidying the apartment. She was young and beautiful as Hebe. Barely 18 she looked. What shall I say? Temptation was strong. I took her into my arms and kissed her. She tore herself away, the flushes of shame in her face, crying, I am a poor girl, sir, but I am honest. Poor, my child? I said. With a face and figure like yours, one is never poor. You might buy the heart of a millionaire. Beauty is a wealth of capital if well laid out. They were the words of the moment, one of those silly speeches which fast men abound in. The girl was silent, blushing still, but I continued. And now, my fair one, you shall give me another kiss, of your own free will, to reward me for the useful lesson I have taught you. I dare say we shall never meet again. She still resisted, but I was young and handsome and thoroughly versed in the arts of persuasion. I presently held her in my arms again, and she did kiss me. The girl was quite in my power. I knew it, but opportunity was not mine. I heard the horses pawing, and there was a train to be caught. So I loosened my hold, and as though beauty were indeed the capital I had spoken of, bringing riches to the owner, I put a sovereign into her hand. I saw no particular harm in what I had done. Thousands in my place, no doubt, would have said and done as I did. But, in truth, I was guilty of an awful thing. I had poisoned the very lifeblood of the girl. Her innocence was gone. Corruption had taken root in her soul. My spirit somehow has a knowledge of her future career. She had been engaged to an honest working man, but her beauty, if she married him, would not bear the interest she now coveted. So she broke with him. He had loved her, and hardly, if ever, got over the blow. She went her way, putting out her capital, laying traps to the right and to the left, but cleverly as she laid them, she after all was caught herself, falling a victim where she had hoped to conquer, and was flung aside again. She was ruined, but the horrible lesson I had left with her was nowise rendered harmless. On the contrary, she improved it all the more. As a courtesan, she continued her career, and soon there was none more knowing, none more dangerous, than she. One fool after another went the way to her house to his soul's ruin, and her capital laid out bore interest vastly, being the fruit of that first sovereign I had given her. But rich she grew not. The money went as it came, squandered recklessly. And before she dreamt of it, the capital itself was gone. She struggled a while, sinking deeper and deeper, and died in utter misery. But even that is not all. The lesson I had taught her proved not only a poison to herself, but with it she poisoned others, teaching scores of girls the pernicious lie. Beauty is a capital. Lay it out. Lay it out. Thus it went with her with whom in life I had but a moment's intercourse, whose name even I never knew. What shall I say then of many others? What of Annie, against whom I sinned far more grievously? Strange that the spirit knowledge, which tells me so much, is entirely at fault whenever I think of her. But it is a blessing. What if she too were to rise before me, crying, "Thou didst it! Thou didst it!" The force of example, I repeat it, is terrible. Terrible! And the responsibility of all, therefore, is great with whom influence rests in a special way, as it does with those, for instance, to whom the young are taught to look. That is why there are so many here who had charge of children. Parents, guardians, teachers, nurses innumerable. They go to hell first. Of course they do. But they are followed by many of those whom they should have taught the way of life. And not only are they followed by them, but by their children after them, generation rising against generation in awful accusation. I am one of the worst of those who dare not lift their head, so I may well speak in warning. I know what awaits me. I am thinking of Martin, poor boy. It was I who brought him up, feeding him on evil example. I have made him what he is. But what has become of him, and what will become of his children? I had no family in life. Alas, I may have one in hell, larger than I care to see, the children of my iniquity. But there is hope for Martin. He is yet in life. May the Lord have mercy on him and his. How I loved him in spite of his waywardness. Perhaps it was self-love, after all. Perhaps I loved him only inasmuch as he seemed to reflect myself. Yet there was power in that love, in spite of supervening jealousy. He grew more handsome, more taken than even I had been, ousting me by degrees out of my every pride. But jealous though I felt, I yet loved him, and the time came when he was master. I remember well how one day I was humbled by the sudden consciousness of it. I had been specially careful of his bodily development, seeing to it myself. His mental training I left to others. I taught him gymnastics and all sort of manly exercises in which I excelled, fencing, wrestling, and the like. He was tall and powerful, and exquisitely proportioned. Barely 20, he resembled some athlete of antiquity. We practiced daily, and I found that he had gained as steadily as I had lost. There was a time, at last, when with difficulty I could hold my own. And then it came, I could never speak of it calmly, that he floored me, standing over me, a very Hercules of strength. From that day I knew that he had the ascendancy over me. It was natural, for I had passed the zenith. He was approaching it. But it was mortifying, and I could not forgive it. And yet, with strange inconsistency, I was proud of him, loving him all the more fondly. My grudge against him, however, took a more real turn when I found that he outdid me in the favor of women as well. That was more than even my fondest love could stand. Will he join me here? The beating of my heart seems to say yes, for he belongs to me, and I am here. Then I shall find an answer to that burning question which filled my soul as I quitted life, and which burns with a fire of its own here amid many fires. But ought I to wish for an answer? I have a frightful foreboding at times that the answer my soul is craving will overwhelm me with horror. But, nevertheless, and though it should be all horrors combined in one, I am hungering and thirsting for it, nor can I rest till I find it. What is it he had to tell me? End of letter 8.